Hello. Today I'm going to be talking to you about how Hitler attracted the votes. Why did people vote for Adolf Hitler? That's going to be our focus today, and I'm going to talk to you about it and hopefully explain it to you, and you'll be an expert by the end of this. So let's crack on then. Reasons why people voted for the Nazis. Essentially, I boiled this down to 5 key reasons why. The first one is to do with economics. The Wall Street crash obviously had a big impact on America, and because of that, it has a big impact on the rest of the world, which leads to the Great Depression. That is one of the reasons why people are going to start voting for Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, and we'll talk about that in a tick. Another reason is anger at the Weimar government. When we had, particularly after the Wall Street crash, the German voters start to appreciate that actually our politicians aren't doing a particularly good job at the moment. We need to do something about it. Maybe we should start voting for other political parties. And so we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. Next, we've got the appeal of Hitler. Hitler is a very charismatic leader whose speeches were inspiring to so many people. And he's offered this ray of hope in a very troubled time. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how that convinced people to vote for him. Fear of communism was something that was ever present. We'll talk about why there was that fear in particular at that time, especially as we don't seem to have that fear now. So what was it about 1920s into 1930s Germany that made that quite scary? And lastly, we have the structure and the organisation of the Nazi Party. What was it about the Nazi Party that maybe stood it out from the other political parties that could have won elections? So let's start with economics. Here's a graph. Have a look-see at it. I'm not going to immediately rush into talking about it, but have a look, see what you think it's all about. Okay, that's long enough. Hopefully what you can see is that this graph is all about unemployment in Germany. So it starts with, let's get my hands right, there-ish. In 1928, that's weird. In 1928, we have about 2.1 million people unemployed, which is obviously, it's quite bad, but it's not as bad as it could be, because as we can see, let's go all the way up here. Here we have it peaking at 6 million people in January 1932. That's pretty bad. So let me move it across. That's pretty bad. It means obviously that with huge unemployment, people are going to be very upset. Why is unemployment peaking in January 1932? Well, hopefully you remember it's all to do with that Wall Street crash and the Great Depression. After the Wall Street crash, we get that ripple effect that goes around the world, and it affects Germany quite badly, very badly indeed. It affects a lot of countries in Europe actually, but Germany also suffers quite badly from it. And whilst you can see unemployment on the whole gets worse after 1929, and it's a gradual thing, but it's getting worse and worse and worse, Germany doesn't seem to have any answers to this problem. Here's another way of looking at the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression and its impact on Germany. This is a quotation from a German worker in 1934. He was explaining to an American journalist about why he voted for the Nazis. Thousands of factories closed their doors. Hunger was the daily companion of the German working man. Many an honest working man had to resort to theft to obtain food. All fellow citizens yearned for better times. As for me, like many another, I had lost all I possessed. So, early in 1930, I joined the Nazi Party. So when we look at this source, it kind of gives us a really nice insight as to why people resorted to voting for the Nazis, or indeed joining the Nazi Party. This tells us it's about desperation. It's an economic thing. It's not about what the Nazis are saying about Jewish people or about creating a large empire. This is about economics, about lost jobs and struggling to put food on the table. That's what inspired lots of people to vote for the Nazis. Certainly this guy in this case. So what's interesting is when you compare what the Nazis were saying after the Wall Street crash and during the Great Depression, is not actually that different to what they were saying at the beginning of the 1920s and throughout the 1920s. They were still blaming the same people for the same things. They said Treaty of Versailles, it's a crime against Germany. We should do everything we can to reverse the Treaty of Versailles. We should certainly stop paying reparations, is their key message. They also say Again, that Jews are secretly behind the economic problems that Germany faces. They are the cause to this depression that they're experiencing, and therefore the Nazi Party will do something about them. This is quite a clever tactic and an old tactic that the Nazis are using here. It's called scapegoating. When people are upset or angry, they don't want to hear that it's their fault. They want to be able to point their finger at someone else, someone who's easy to blame. And in this case, the minority that were the Jews in Germany at the time, about 1% of the population, it was easy for them to go, yeah, you're the problem. And the Nazis tapped in on that. And so they said, yep, it's the Jewish people's fault. Another key message that the Nazis talked about a lot was that Germany needs to be reborn again. Germany has been humiliated after the Treaty of Versailles, yet before World War I, it was a great power. It was a formidable power in the world. People looked at the German army and gave it the respect that it deserved. People don't do that anymore because obviously the German army has been massively reduced due to the Treaty of Versailles. And so the Nazis will make the point that actually, if we come to power, we will make Germany a powerful, great power again. That's going to be something that we'll aim for. And nationalistic feeling people will go, actually, yeah, I want that. That's what Germany should be like. And so they'll jump on board and they'll want to vote for the Nazis. Germans are so desperate, though, even though this message hasn't changed, they're so desperate for change that they decide, yeah, we want to start voting for the Nazis. And that's why we see the German vote go up, or the Nazi vote go up, sorry. But what else can we learn from this? Ooh, let's move out of the way. A German student in early 1930s being interviewed about the impact of the Great Depression on Germany. What did he promise? He's referring to Hitler here. What did he promise? Work and bread for the masses. For the millions of workers... I'm going to start this again. What did he promise? Work and bread for the masses, for the millions of workers that were unemployed and hungry at that time. Nowadays, work and bread doesn't mean very much. But at the time, it was an absolute necessity, a basic need. And this promise wouldn't make any sense today. Then, it sounded like a promise of paradise. So Hitler spoke about the need for Germany to have bread and work again, for the Germans to have bread and work again, to be able to eat and feed their families and enjoy their fruits of their labour. This was his promise. And in fact, if I move out the way again, and we go to the next slide, we can see that very promise. Arbeit und Brot, work and bread. It was a key slogan the Nazis used in the Great Depression period to try and encourage the vote. We will give you work and we will give you bread. It's effective, and as this German student talking in 1973 was making the point that these things, although they don't seem significant now, were so important to the German people in the 1930s. And so the Nazis appealed to them because actually here they are offering just what they need. Right, so that's our first issue, economics. What about politics? Well, the Weimar government had been weak for quite some time by the time we get to the 1930s. It has, and these are numbers that are well worth remembering. In the 14 years the Weimar government existed, from 1919 to 1933, it had 20 governments. In that time, it had 14 chancellors. 14 chancellors in 14 years. What are we today? 2021. 14 years ago, oh my goodness, I'm going to embarrass myself now. 2007. How many leaders, prime ministers of England, have we had since 2007? I'm going to say 3, maybe, well, that's going to be 4-ish. 4. That's a guess. Please don't check it. So to have 14 in that same time period is incredible. It's a very high number. So it gives you an idea, it gives you an indication of just how weak and fragile the Weimar Republic is if governments keep collapsing and we keep having to have new chancellors coming in. Chancellors from the 1930 onwards struggled in particular. Now, to give them some credit, they are dealing with something that no chancellors have had to deal with before, this Great Depression. It's unprecedented. I think a lot of people would have struggled. Dare I say it, even the wonderful Gustav Stresemann might have struggled. Now, the poor guy in the hot seat at the time is this chap above me, Chancellor Brüning, Heinrich Brüning. He's the guy who's in the hot seat from 1930 to 1932. So he's trying to solve this this crisis, this economic crisis in Germany. So what's he do? Number one is he tries to increase taxes on businesses. The German government desperately needs to scrape more money together because at the moment it's having to pay a lot of unemployment benefits. And so it doesn't have the amount of money to pay for them all, so it tries to grab more money. And so Brüning decides the best way to do that is to start taxing businesses higher. Of course, as you know, that leads to businesses going bankrupt. They just to collapse because they can't afford these higher taxes. Of course, the other thing he's trying to do is give unemployment pay to everyone. And so what he needs to do is reduce unemployment pay, which makes him wildly unpopular. So poor old Brüning, he's trying somehow to navigate Germany through this very difficult time, and he is becoming very unpopular with business leaders, and he's becoming very unpopular with the working class. He even tried to pass a law that would confiscate land, rich people's land, to try and help give that to the poor, to help the poor people out. Unsurprisingly, that's the straw that breaks their back in terms of Hindenburg. Hindenburg, a big landowner, is not too happy about Brüning's idea about removing land from the rich and giving it to the poor. And so he says, sorry, Brüning, your time's up, and he gets rid of him. But in Brüning's defense, what can you do? But of course, the workers, the voters out there, they don't have sympathy for Brüning. They just see a man who's failing to deal with this national crisis. And so they're furious. There's other reasons why the Weimar Republic has been failing, and Hitler's been very hot on this. He's been making this point in many of his speeches. So Hitler criticizes Weimar politics often. He said that Germany needs a strong leader who would get things done. He's harking back here to the days of the Kaiser. Now, by the time we get to 1930, a lot of people in Germany are starting to look back on the Kaiser days with far more positivity and far more. They view it far more positively. They see that those were the good old days. We never used to have depressions in the days of the Kaiser. Things were much better. And so Hitler taps in and that goes, yes, we need a strong leader again. We need someone who is willing to make decisions by himself and not have to rely on the petty arguments that Reichstags and MPs make. No. That kind of politics doesn't work in Germany. What we need is a strong leader who can guide us through these tough times. He also makes the point that actually, what I'm saying about we need a strong leader isn't controversial. In this country, democracy has failed. Democracy does not produce strong governments. It does not lead to consistency in your leaders. 14 different chancellors in 14 years. It's actually the only way that laws are being passed at the moment is not through votes in Parliament. No. It's Article 48. So the only way laws are being passed really between 1930 and 32 is Hindenburg stepping in and using his Article 48 powers to get the law passed without going through Reichstag. That's essentially the end of democracy. If you're not using the Reichstag anymore, if you're not asking MPs to vote on it, or if MPs are voting on it and they're saying no and you just pass the law anyway, that's not democracy anymore. So Hitler's got a point when he says democracy is dead. It doesn't exist because we're just using Article 48. We're forcing laws through. To give you an example, and this is a really good number to remember, in 1932 alone, Article 48 is used 60 times to pass laws. That's not a democratic system. So more and more people, at the same time, more and more workers, more and more voters are now looking at the political parties on offer and going, actually, yeah, democracy isn't working. And so they start to vote for the political parties that promise to end democracy in Germany. Not a majority yet, but what we're seeing is more and more people are voting for anti-democratic parties. And I'll give you a good example of this. Now, I've only chosen 3 parties. There's loads of German political parties at the time, but I've chosen 3 key ones for us. So we've got the Social Democrat Party, who are the main democratic party in Germany. They're the ones that kind of best embody the Weimar Republic. They've been the biggest party in Weimar Germany for much of this period that we're looking at. Then we've got the Nazi Party, and I've also thrown in the Communist Party. So let's focus in on the SPD, the Social Democrat Party. In these elections, so we have an election in May 1928, September 1930, July 1932, and then November 1932. You'll need to remember those dates. We'll see that actually what's happening to the amount of seats that this political party is getting in the Reichstag? Can you see the pattern? Gosh, I hope you can see the pattern. They're going down. 153 seats they got in the Reichstag in May 1928. By the time we get to November 1932, it's down to 121 seats. Still quite a lot, but it's definitely on a downward curve. Whereas if we look at the anti-democratic parties, the Nazi Party and the Communist Party, look at their votes. On the whole, they're going, let me see if I can get this right way around, they're going up. May 1928, the Nazis only gather 12 seats in the Reichstag. And yet by 1932, the first election in 1932, they get 230 seats. Now, the reason why they drop from 230 seats to 196 seats in July, from July to November, is really simple. When Hitler and his party get 230 seats in July 1932, Hindenburg doesn't appoint Hitler. The Nazis are the largest party in the Reichstag, but Hindenburg dislikes Hitler so much he refuses to give him the job of Chancellor. And so what happens after July 1932, as we get to November 1932, is some people go, hang on, should we still vote for Hitler, given that Hindenburg keeps saying he won't make him Chancellor? So hopefully that explains the slight drop-off. But it's well worth noting that in November 1932, even though that number has dropped down to 196 seats in the Reichstag, they're still the biggest party. So they are still the most dominant party in the Reichstag. And look at the Communist Party. The numbers aren't as close or as much as the Nazi Party, but again, another anti-democratic party, and their votes are just going up. 54 up to 100 by November 1932. So on the whole, what we're seeing here is a pattern. Democratic parties, their vote is dropping, still high, but dropping. Anti-democratic parties, their votes are on the rise. And that's the kind of pattern we're seeing because people are falling out of love with the Weimar Republic. Another reason why people start voting for the Nazi Party is a very simple reason. Hitler. The Nazis knew that Hitler was their trump card. They know that he was the reason why people will want to vote for them. And as such, their propaganda focuses on him quite a bit, as we'll see in a second. He was portrayed often as the saviour of Germany. He lived up to that massively. You got to, I wish I could show you now, but if you go onto YouTube and just type in Hitler speech, you'll find Hitler giving a speech somewhere. And you don't need the English translation. Just listen to it in German. And he speaks like no one else these days does. Like you won't come across one of our politicians today speaking the way he does. The amount of passion in his voice, what he does with his hands, he moves them around all over the place. He's trying to portray to the German people just how much he cares about Germany, how much he pains to see the Germans suffer. These kind of shows, these kind of declarations really appeal to the German people. They look at this and go, look at this guy. Look how passionate he is. This guy cares. And they look at other German politicians and they go, does that guy care? I don't see that guy clenching his hands when he makes these points and screaming about how the enemies of Germany are causing us problems. This guy cares. I'm going to vote for him. That seems to be the method. And it's really interesting. Hitler knows this. He wants to project himself as a strong leader. So you get some strange little anecdotes about him. Like, for example, one of them is he actually wears reading glasses. But he didn't dare to be seen in public wearing glasses because he thought, the voters will see that as a weakness. So what he used to do is have his text increased to 1.2 centimeters in height. That's really big writing. So he could see it without wearing his reading glasses. So those posters, like I say, they want to make Hitler front and center. So people, when they think of the Nazi Party, they're thinking of Hitler. So here's a few posters that they rock out. Yes, leader, we follow you. You can see there's a picture of Hitler in the foreground and then lots and lots of German people behind him. He represents the people is the message here. He is the guy who represents us. He doesn't represent politicians or others. He represents us. Therefore, we should vote for him. This one's a classic. You often see this in exams. Our last hope, Hitler. This one's really aimed towards the workers. You can kind of tell that from this image because here's lots of down and out people. probably unemployed, probably hungry. Look at the colours that the artists have used here, very drab colours. Then you get this big declaration, our last hope, Hitler. And when you look into their eyes, into those the way the artists have drawn those people, you can start to believe it. Yeah, these people have no hope unless Hitler can do something for them, which I think is a very clever picture. Right, and lastly, let's go boop, invisible. But lastly, we've got this brilliant poster. Again, very simple. Long live Germany is the translation of the bit at the bottom. But look how clever it is. There's Hitler right at front and centre. I mean, literally front and centre, holding the Nazi flag, the swastika on the flag. Behind him, his army of followers. And above him, the cloudy skies of Germany. Germany's going through a very dark time. There's dark clouds on the horizons of Germany. But there's light blasting through because Hitler is going to lead them into greatness. And they've even put the German eagle, which if you've ever seen the German football team play, you'll know it's on the crest on their shirt. It represents Germany. So the German eagle flying out through those clouds into the light. It suggests that Germany's going to become strong again under Nazis. Very good poster. Right, next up. Another real concern is the fear of communism. Now, as you might know, hopefully you know, in 1917, there had been a successful communist revolution in Russia. I won't get into detail here, but essentially the Russians had been fed up with their last leader. They had a similar leader to a Kaiser. He was called the Tsar. He was a member of the royal family, and they just had enough of him. And so we have a couple of revolutions, and eventually the communists win. Now, the problem, or the outcome of that revolution in Russia was that businesses were nationalised. That means that the communist government, looked at businesses and said, right, we're going to take over you, I'm afraid. So if you owned a department store or even a small shop, you no longer owned it. The government did, which means that any profits that store or little local shop made goes to the government. Now, the theory behind communism is that that's a good thing, because if the government's taking the profits from businesses, it can use that money to increase wages or to pay for better services, better education and better police and things like that. Of course, not everyone's happy with that. The business leaders are not happy with that. Also, land is taken away from the wealthy landowners and again given to the peasants to grow food for the rest of the Russians. And the other issue is religion is banned. The communists see religion as just a way of controlling people, and so they're dead against it. So that's happened in Russia, which isn't far away from Germany. So what we find in Germany is the middle and upper classes were very worried about the threat of communism in Germany. Now, we have seen this threat before. If you remember, back in January 1919, we had the Spartacist Uprising. It's a communist uprising led by Rosa Luxemburg and that guy that everyone forgets, poor old Karl Liebknecht. That fails, but there was quite a lot of people involved in that uprising. Now, communism thrives best when there is poverty, because people become desperate, they look for solutions, the extreme solutions, and communism is the extreme solution. And so the worry is, oh no, people are going to start voting for communists. We might have a communist revolution. That's very worrying for these middle class people, particularly because they're shop owners. They don't want to lose their businesses. And it's very concerning for the upper classes because they don't want to lose their land. It's also very concerning for the religious people because Germany is very religious. It's very Protestant, and there's a lot of Catholics there as well. They don't want to have their religion banned. And so, yeah, there's a particular worry about the rise of communism, particularly during the Great Depression. So, some turned to the Nazis because the Nazis have always been against communism. Hitler has never shied away from criticising communists. Many a speech he's given saying he will crush the communists. And so that appeals to people, particularly the middle class after the Great Depression. So Hitler's message has always been to destroy communism. And he's got a good history of that in terms of evidence that he can give to people to show how serious he is. He's used the SA to disrupt Communist Party meetings. They've beaten up communists in the streets. They're running battles with them. It shows to people, look, we are serious. There's actions behind our words. We will destroy communism if you vote for us. And so sure enough, a lot of middle class people, a lot of big businesses owners start supporting the Nazis. The Nazis get most of their money, their income, comes from donations from big business owners because they are desperate to see the Nazis crush the threat of communism. So don't forget that the middle classes, and in particular the big business owners, are the ones financing the Nazis. And most of the Nazi support, well over 50% of the Nazi support, comes from the middle classes. It's the middle class, the lawyers and the doctors and, like I say, shop owners. They're the ones that are voting for the Nazis, more so than any other group. Oh, there you go. The majority of Nazi voters come from the middle class. Right, our last one we're going to look at today is just the organisation of the Nazi Party. How is it structured that is going to lead it to success, and how is it perhaps different from other political parties? So if you remember, Hitler's original idea was a violent overthrow of the system. We get that in the Munich Putsch. His thinking is, I'm going to lead this uprising against the German government and I will take over. Of course, it fails and he gets put into prison. And it's whilst he's in prison, as you know, he writes his book, Mein Kampf. He lays down his new ideas about how he's going to take control of Germany. And the big change is obviously he's going to do it legally. And so when he comes out of prison, he knows he needs to restructure the Nazi Party. So what's he going to do? How is he going to increase awareness of the Nazi Party? So the first thing he's going to do is he's going to try and encourage Nazi offices to be set up all over Germany. The Nazi Party was born in Bavaria, which is a state in Germany. He wants it all over the country. And so he's encouraging these offices to be set up all over the country so that people have more interactions with Nazis. Local Nazi officials in these different offices around the country were given training in public speaking to make the Nazis seem more professional and more approachable as well. In 1931, we see an increase in the SA. So in 1931, there were 100,000 members of the SA. By the time we get to 1932, that number has quadrupled to 400,000. Now, why have I thrown that in there? It just gives us an idea about the scale of the interest in the Nazis, that new recruits are coming in all the time to join organisations like the SA. Now, we shouldn't be too surprised because the SA was a good organisation to join if you're unemployed. And I think a lot of unemployed people joined the SA during this period because what else are they going to do? Let's move out of the way so we can get some more information down. Oh, we're going to find out way more about the Hitler Youth later on. But another big change was that Hitler rebrands the Hitler Youth. Now, the Hitler Youth has existed since 1922, but it's rebranded and formally launched again in 1926. The goal behind the Hitler Youth is to try and encourage support from the young, because it's all very well being popular with older people, parents and voters, but at some point those young people need to vote. Well, they'll grow up and want to vote, and so Hitler decides I need to control them as well, and so he creates these organisations called the Hitler Youth. And it's very popular. We'll worry more about the Hitler Youth when we're looking at the 1930s and when Hitler's actually in power, because that's when the Hitler Youth really takes off. Right, the last thing we're going to look at is the power of Goebbels. Now, Goebbels is so important. He's super duper important to Nazi, to raising the awareness of the Nazis and kind of selling them as a brand. He rises up from the Nazi ranks after the Munich Putsch, and by the 1928 he's given responsibility for propaganda in the Nazi Party. And oh my goodness, is he good at propaganda for the Nazis. He was keen that the Nazis try to dominate the media, and he does this. He goes about this in several ways. First of all, he tries to get the Nazis into the newsreels at cinemas. If you went to the cinema to watch a film, unlike today where you see adverts and trailers for other films and things, you just got newsreels before your film started. And it was the only time people could actually see video footage of the news. This is the time before television. So having your representative, having Adolf Hitler there, almost in the flesh, on screen, talking and meeting people, that's brilliant, because then people can actually see Hitler and see what he's like. So Goebbels was very keen to get him into that news slot. Likewise, this new technology, radio, is kind of thriving at the time. By the early 1930s, 5 million Germans have radios, and Goebbels is super keen to get Hitler's voice onto them. So again, he approaches radio companies, tries to get them to play Hitler's speeches or at least interviews as much as they can. Newspapers. Back then, a big deal. Lots of political parties did this, but the Nazis do it too. Nazis bought a newspaper or several newspapers to try and speak directly to the people. The most important one they buy is the Munich Observer. It's actually called something else in German, but we'll stick to the English name, the Munich Observer. Although it sounds like it's just a local newspaper, it's published around the country. And so, again, it's another really important way of communicating to people all over Germany. And as you'd expect, they print millions of leaflets and posters. So when a few moments ago, when I was showing those pictures of Hitler and how heroic he looks, that's Goebbels through and through. He's working with artists to create these pictures. Goebbels also put on large-scale parades called rallies, in which Nazis in uniform marched through the streets to kind of show off how well organised they are. So they all march in tandem. They all look super neat because they're wearing their Nazi uniforms. Very, very, it's quite a spectacle. This is brilliant because at that time, Germany is in chaos. We talk about the Great Depression quite a bit and how politicians are bumbling over how to solve it. At that time, given the chaos that Germany is suffering, here's the Nazis doing these well-organised marches, actually just looking the exact opposite of the government. They look super organised. So when Hitler's giving speeches saying, we will sort our country's problems out, I will bring you work and food, these are actual, he can back that up with, look how organised we are. It's incredible, a brilliant idea, and it works a massive treat. Right, that's it. Gosh, you've listened to me for quite some time. Apologies for that. So why did people vote for Hitler? What led him to come into power? People voted him for 5 reasons. 1, to do with economics. Germany is financially very poor. Unemployment is a real issue. Desperate people start voting for they start voting for extremist parties, and the Nazis benefit. Number 2, there's anger at the Weimar government because the German politicians don't seem to have a grip on how to solve the economic problems. And historically speaking, they just don't work well together, these different political parties. 3, Hitler was very appealing to the German people. His speeches were passionate. He seemed to genuinely care about the future of Germany, and people bought into that. A fear of communism was one of the reasons why middle-class people in particular chose to vote for the Nazis, because they're afraid of a communist revolution. And as we saw earlier, a lot of big businesses financially support the Nazis. And lastly, the Nazi party used incredible tactics in order to get the support of the people, including brilliant propaganda. Okay, that's everything you need to know about why people voted for the Nazis.